What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Lassercast. Chris and I, we are back. Unfortunately, Pete is out. He's doing his family stuff. Chris, Future Boy Chris on Twitter, DrZaiusGoD over here, and we're bringing you the finale, episodes 7, 8, and 9 of The Haunting of Bly Manor, streaming now on Netflix. You can go to our channel and check out our first two videos on episodes 1 through 3 and 4 through 6. And if you're wondering, yes, Chris and I, we just decided to wear the same shirts for this episode. And
we're filthy places. Animals.
Yeah, no worries. So episode 7, we'll jump right into it. Episode 7 is actually a sequel episode. It's called The Two Faces Part 2. It was written by the Clarkson brothers and directed again by Ben Howling and Yolanda Ramke, who directed episode 6. And this is the episode that focuses on mainly, the main story of this one is Rebecca Jessel and Peter Quint and how they plan to escape Bly Manor. So you want to jump into their evil, diabolical ghost plan?
Absolutely. So yeah, last episode we learned that, Danny learns what Rebecca and Peter have been up to, and she knows now that they've been using the kids. And a very interesting thing happens after all of that's explained. As spirits, they seem to be getting called away. Rebecca and Peter seem to get called away by different things. Rebecca hears voices that kind of lead her away in the attic, and she disappears. And Peter hears a knocking that he tries to ignore. And you learn throughout the episode that is his, you learn by I interpret it as they're getting called away by almost their worst memories.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
There's actually, so Peter's worst memory is his mother knocking on his door. And you can just tell in this very short exposition heavy scene that he had an awful childhood, terrible relationship. His father blames him for something. We don't really find out the details. His mother is guilt tripping him. We can tell where he gets it from. His mother is basically like, I need to live with you. Do you want me to be out on the street? And then very quickly from that segues to, or maybe I can tell your boss about your childhood. And you're like, whoa, mom, okay. Yeah. But there's a scene in one of these, and just like Owen and Hannah, and coming back where we go back and forth to that scene of Owen's job interview. I used to be a sous chef in France, and all I did was chop vegetables. We see that scene over and over again. We see this scene with Peter and his mother at least 3 different times. And at one point she does say, this is your hell, isn't it? And yeah, so like to your point about their worst memory, I interpreted it almost as it's obviously, yes, their worst memory, but it could even be, especially for people like Peter, who are genuinely bad people, pretty much. It could be an interpretation of kind of hell, where you do
purgatory.
You live your worst moments over and over again.
I'm not sure that flashbacks exist in this show. I feel like the characters get tucked away, and then we get tucked away as audience members sometimes, because you're brought back at one point where Jamie has a heart-to-heart with Rebecca. They've because the Lady of the Lake has now killed Peter. They think that Peter has taken money from the Wingrave Company and run away. And Jamie basically has a heart-to-heart with Rebecca and says, listen, you had plans before this. You were on a road. Get back on that road. He doesn't care about you. And it was kind of his last-ditch effort to, basically save Rebecca, save that character. And no, Peter swindles her for the last time in life. He comes to her and says, listen, I'm dead. Their hands pass through each other. And that's how he proves to her that he's gone. And, again, once he swindles her for the last time in life, and basically, you now know that Peter has learned what he did with Miles on accident. He now has gone away for a bit and learned that you can do with anyone. And he basically enters Rebecca's body and kills her, brings her down to the lake, and for his own selfish reasons, ends her life.
Yeah. And there's this great moment where she's laying in bed with him, but it's a tuck away moment where then she realizes he's not in bed with her, and she looks up, and above the bed is the water. And then it flashes immediately to her underwater in the lake, struggling to get out, floating down to Peter's corpse at the bottom of the lake. And you just know that's it. Like, that's how and then Jamie finds Flora in front of the lake staring out as Miss Jessel's body is there.
Yeah.
We love Mike Flanagan work, but I do feel like this is the one time I'll be overtly critical. This was the episode of the 9 episodes I probably rank as my least favorite.
I would agree.
And I think partly is the character of Miss Jessel, who was acted fantastically by Tahira Sharif, I believe is her name. She's great, but I felt that the writing, I felt like her character almost felt cut and pasted out of any Lifetime original movie that, like, you would make almost like a stereotypical Lifetime movie of, like, career woman who gets upended by handsome stranger who turns out to be abusive and ends up killing her. And it felt, the way her character went kind of felt stereotypical in a way of
it's definitely the weakest point of the series. It's definitely the weakest point of the series. I feel like if this was the primary focus, we'd be having a much different conversation. Thank God it's not, but it's still with the background of the other characters and where this all leads, it definitely thickens it up a little. It gives it a little more life. But you're right. At this subplot, at its core, it's a Lifetime original movie.
Yeah, and the other thing that I noticed, especially with the scene you're bringing up about Jamie talking to her, we've seen that scene before. We just saw it in the last episode where Hannah talks to Rebecca and is like, "You can't throw your life away for Peter Quint." And then, they're in, all of them are gathered together in the kitchen, and Rebecca's off in the background. She's miserable. Peter's, we know he's dead, but he's left. And they're, "Oh, we don't ever want to hear the name Peter Quint again." And then Jamie's like, "Oh, you're a career woman. Go and pursue that career. You can do it without Peter." And it's like 3-4 times everybody's telling her that she shouldn't get bogged down by this, creepazoid guy. And it just kind of felt, by the time she unfortunately ends up getting killed by him, it felt repetitive in that way. So this episode does kind of drag for me. And the idea also of them using the children as vessels to leave Bly Manor. That's kind of a haunting thing, taking over the lives of a 10 and 8-year-old. That was a little creepy, but
there's at least I will, to the credit of a weaker part of this overall storyline, I will say I'm glad there are at least more than one motive for that. Of course, they want to be able to leave Bly. They want to eventually figure that out using the children as vessels, but also the faceless ghost addict makes the faceless addict ghost makes another appearance in this. And Peter basically says, this is what's going to happen to us if we do not, his rationale for everything is so disturbing. And he also has, but also the end result, if they don't do it, is disturbing. But, even Oliver Jackson Cohen in what we both consider to be the weakest episode of the 9, has one of those Golden Globe clip moments. He has a great monologue where he's basically explaining to Peter what's going to happen to them. And you get an idea that, everything in his life has really come to this moment. So he takes over Miles' body, seeks out Hannah because he knows Hannah's been wandering around, and says, all right, you and me, we got to have a talk. They go down to the well, and he basically makes the ghost of Hannah come to terms with what's actually happened to her, makes her look down the well. And then we cut back to the attic, and we learn that Rebecca tricked Peter. She did not take over the body of Flora, and they basically let Danny go. Danny grabs Flora, says, we got to get out of here. They wind up in the driveway, and bam, another choke grab by the Lady of the Lake.
Ooh.
And the episode ends with Danny getting dragged away. And, again, the weaker episode, we both agree, but definitely a terrific end.
And not only a terrific end, but a terrific lead in to what we both agree is the best episode, or for us, our favorite episode of the 9 of Bly
Hands
Manor.
Hands down.
Episode 8, which we were talking before we pressed record, and we said, if this was a 55-minute movie, this would have been probably my favorite movie of 2020, because this episode is just out of the goddamn. Mike Flanagan did not direct this, but it is dripping with Mike Flanagan all over it.
I would have, and that I take nothing away from Axel Caroline, who directed this. She did a phenomenal job. Obviously, it's our favorite episode of the series. But I would have lost. I would have put down a few Benjamins that it was Flanagan who directed this, mainly because he got two Flanagan, his two Kates. I like to refer to them as Katie Parker and his wife Kate Siegel, play the Willoughby sisters, and you're, like you said, just not only the best episode of the season of the series, just a fantastic hour-long standalone mini film.
Yeah. Oh, it's just fantastic. And Kate Siegel, this is going to sound weird, but I almost really want Kate Siegel to do something outside of the Flanagan umbrella, so that she's not just labeled as Mike Flanagan's wife who acts in his films, because she is so goddamn good in everything she does. And I mean, I love that they are a couple and that they work together and they write together. We covered Hush on this channel, and she co-wrote that and acts the hell out of that movie. But yeah, I would love her to get the mainstream fanfare that she deserves, because she is such a great actress. And
that entrance she makes when their distant cousin Arthur shows up, and she walks in and she's got like almost a unisex, like it's not even fully men's, it's like almost like a man, because women were considered nothing without men at that time, and she comes in with this what could almost be like a tight fitting, like a men's riding uniform and a riding crop, and just makes this double door open tipped cap entrance, and blows their distant cousin Arthur just out of his seat. He's completely in awe of her, as is the audience.
Yeah, and this episode is a flashback of a flashback. We're going way back to, I think it's the 1800s, and there's so her and Katie Parker, right? That Katie Parker are their sisters. She's the older sister, Viola, and at first it seems that Perdita, the younger sister, played by Katie Parker, is going to kind of fall in love with this guy Arthur, who's actually their like distant cousin, but that was accepted back in the
Yeah,
1800s.
that's a whole. No one even batted an eyelash.
And what's funny is where this whole episode is narrated where Carla Gugino's another Mike Flanagan leading lady. She has been a very distant narrator throughout this series. She comes and goes a little bit here and there. She basically narrates this entire episode. There's very little actual dialogue with these characters in the 1800s in black and white. So again, this is where I think like fans like us, and I'm not putting us on a higher level, but I feel like horror fans that are not the, yay, it's Halloween month, I'm going to watch some horror movies people, we might appreciate it more that we're getting this almost old school black and white narrated episode. Whereas for a more modern fan, I know my daughter, who people who watch our videos on this channel probably know from some of the other videos here, Charlotte, she walked in while I was watching this and she was like, why is it in black and white? I'm like, you'll learn one day. You know, the young people, I have students all the time who tell me that they don't want to watch a black and white movie because it's old. I don't want to watch that.
Yeah.
Chill out. Yeah, it's good.
No, and black and white. I try to explain black and white films. Listen, I watched The Old Dark House twice already this week. Like, so the thing about black and white to our generation and even a younger generation, if you look at it as we're so far removed from that era, the 30s, 40s, if you look at it as almost out of time, it's a lot easier you can't look at it as old. The way of speaking, how it looks, everything is so different. You have to almost place it out of time. And I think things are a lot easier I mean, I have no problem watching black and white. I've never had a problem watching it, but I think for people who consider its age a roadblock, I think if you just tell yourself, well, this is out of time, I'm not familiar with this whatsoever, but this is almost like like Watchmen and Tales of the Black Freighter. It's almost this separate story from beginning to end. There are references in it to the other episodes, but other than the grave marker in the church of Viola Lloyd, there's really no reference from the other episodes to this. So I'm very curious. I almost wish I could go back, erase the entire series from my brain, and just put on episode 8 and see if I would be lost in any capacity or if I could just enjoy it for what it was.
And again, you got to think about the streaming mentality. You're watching these episodes one after another after another. The episode ends, and this is something that drives me fucking nuts about Netflix, is the episode ends, and can I get a breath of oxygen before you zoom me into the next episode and skip the credits? It's like,
at the end of every episode, it says staff writer James Flanagan. And that's where every episode cuts off and goes right into the next one.
I actually wrote that down because we had mentioned he does write episode 2, but he is a staff writer. And that's Mike Flanagan's brother, who actually acted in, we actually mentioned him way back in our very first video on this channel when we reviewed Absentia, which was Mike Flanagan's first film. But yeah, you're watching this streaming, and imagine, like, I'm thinking of like the person who occasionally watches a horror movie or will get into a horror movie series, a horror TV series like this. Episode 7 ends with a jump scare. It ends with the Lady of the Lake grabbing Danny, who is essentially the main character of this whole show, and dragging her away. And the only time we've ever seen that happen was to Peter, and he died. So we're like, shit, are they gonna kill Danny with 2 episodes to go? Holy crap. I wonder what happens in the next episode. Black and white. 1800s.
Yeah.
What the fuck? And there is the sheer balls it takes to deviate from a jump scare ending to a black and white narrated episode in the penultimate episode of a season. That is going to be jarring for some people. And we've both talked about, and Pete's also talked about how we've seen some of the reactions to this show on social media. Most of them are positive, but there's always this idea of it was good, but it wasn't as good as Hill House, or it wasn't as scary as I thought it would be, or as I wanted it to be. And this episode, it took balls to do it, especially where it is placed in the season. But, what a great episode.
I said in my initial Stardust reaction, I'm like, even though episode 8 was my favorite, I knew it was my favorite from the first watch. But I said, I'm like, this is going to be a general audience. This is going to be people's least favorite just because it's in black and white, just because we're so close to the end. It's a ballsy thing to do, to deviate from the main storyline when you're one episode away from the finale. And it works. It worked for me even more so the second time around. You have this, you're sucked into this story. There's immediate chemistry between Katie Parker and Kate Siegel. You have these moments where this beautiful shot where they're on the bed together. Their father has just passed away. They've inherited Bly Manor. And they basically, through the narration, you learn that they make this pact to always keep Bly in their control, no matter what man ever comes along and for who.
Which is partly why I think they marry the cousin, because they didn't want to give any outsider. Okay?
It's even marrying the cousin is not verbatim, this is said, but it's referred to as almost a business transaction. The primary focus is keeping, they're women in this time with not a lot of power, and they want to hold on to Bly Manor. So then you learn that Viola, basically she coughs one day, blood shows up. You learn that Viola is suffering from tuberculosis. And, she's gotten to the point where she's bedridden, and the priest has now come, which, by the way, 2 fantastic moments in this with the priest. One is during her and Arthur's wedding, where they're reading back and forth, and Viola purposely leaves the word obey out of their nuptials, and kind of gives Perdita the look, like, hell yeah, I'm not obeying anybody, it's just a great moment. And then that same priest comes back to essentially give Viola her last rites. And she says, no, I'm not doing it. Like, I know, and Perdita jumps in and says, my sister does not, bow down to you, the god you fawn over. It's just these terrific moments in this one episode between the two of them.
It's I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's also important. Yes, it was a business arrangement between her and Arthur, but also her and Arthur do fall in love. And they have a daughter. And when she gets sick, she takes all of her valuable dresses, jewelry, anything that she has that is of financial value, and she puts them in this massive chest that you cannot open unless you have not one,
17
not two,
keys.
It's like a 3-key lock chest, and that chest ends up going up in the attic. And she's given, like you said, she's basically being given her last rites. We didn't mention yet, but the most famous ghost of the first 3 episodes of the show is a plague doctor. And you're like, why is there a plague doctor here? Well, in the middle of the 1800s, when she started coughing up blood, they must have thought she had the plague, because a plague doctor comes to check her out and tells her, no, she doesn't have the plague. It's most likely, tuberculosis. And he tells both Perdita and Arthur, she doesn't have much time. Like, she's not going to live much longer. Like, it could be days, weeks, but she's going to die soon. And she just doesn't. She keeps on living. And
6 years, right?
Yeah. And this, it brings me, and again, this is, the show doesn't reference this, but it reminded me of Owen talking about his mother, and the conversations that the other characters were having about Owen's mother. Jamie, for instance, says, you know, maybe it was a good thing that she died. Maybe it was a blessing that Owen's mother died, because Owen's mother was like basically holding Owen in place in his life. He had aspirations. He was in France. He wanted to go back to France. He wanted to take Hannah with him. And he couldn't do any of these things because he had to take care of his mother. So maybe it was a blessing that she died. And then we go back to this episode, and Viola and Perdita have this amazing relationship, at least at the beginning. But once Viola gets sick, the dynamic of that completely changes. And it leads to some amazing moments where she's trying to take care of Viola, and Viola just angrily slaps her in the face repeatedly. And we're faced with that question of, again, like real horror. You know, like if someone you loved was dying slowly, you know, would you, you know, it's the old question of Dr. Kevorkian for people our age who remember that, you know, very popular news story that happened several years ago. You know, would you be a part of that mercy killing? And Perdita has other reasons for doing what she eventually does. You could go more into that, because I know
Perdita has her, and she does. There may have been a moment where you know, Perdita tells herself she's doing it for mercy. She puts her hand over Viola's mouth one night while she's cradling her and suffocates her. And she tells herself she's doing it because of mercy, but she's really doing it. The fantastic narration by Carla Gugino in this basically tells you that she's not doing it for mercy. In actuality, she's doing it because she's had enough. She's had enough of the slapping and the insults and cleaning up after her sick sister, and what her sister is doing to the house and to the family. And she takes her sister out and basically starts forming a relationship.
Yeah, I was just, because you and I have a video up on the channel right now where we both gave our 30-second reactions to the Mortuary Collection, this awesome new horror anthology that's on Shudder. And there is one of the short scenes in the horror anthology is a scene where a husband is taking care of a sick wife who is on death's door. And the doctors are saying, I don't know how she keeps living. Like she's dying, but she won't die. Yeah. And the husband is in this terrible situation, and it just gets worse for him. And we won't spoil that, but it reminded me of this scene with Perdita and Viola, and how, like, you know, we create the narrative in our own mind of why we do things, especially when we do things that we know are wrong. I teach a criminal justice class, and we were talking about like reasons why people commit crimes, and how everybody rationalizes things in their own mind of, oh, well, you know, like even Robin Hood, the story of Robin Hood, like, you know, there's a version of Robin Hood from the sheriff's point of view, where Robin Hood is this horrible villain, who, you know, and from Prince John's point of view, where, you know, he's having a really tough time ruling this kingdom, and he has to tax the people to get money to pay off the debts of the Crusades. And goddamn Robin Hood is ruining his, you know, and we rationalize things based on the different point of views. And, you know, you said it, Perdita, in her mind, she is doing it for mercy, but we understand that there's a lot more to what she does than just a mercy killing here.
Yeah. So like we were saying, Perdita takes out Viola, and of course, you know, Arthur is one good. You got, you know, marries his. He's gonna make a joke about marrying his first cousin, and maybe it's better moving on to a second cousin, but really, they're, you know, it's not great. Again, at that time, I'm sure no one cared, but so Arthur secretly marries Perdita. And over time, they start going into financial trouble, and Perdita starts resenting him, thinking he's not, doing what he should for the household, and keeps reminding him, "Hey, there's a chest full of linens and dresses and jewelry, and we need this." And though I believe that it wasn't expressed by her, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, even though Viola made Arthur promise to only give these things to their daughter, Perdita has personal reasons why she wants access to these things. But I also believe that it's part of the pact and the relationship that her and Viola once had, that she's in fear of losing Bly Manor. And she's looking at these things as a chest full of opportunities for them to keep their home and to always have it. So, Arthur goes out for the day. She breaks into his office, takes the keys, goes up to the attic, takes half an hour to open the chest because, like I said, there's 27 keys, and we get what's probably the closest thing you're going to get to that great Nell jump scare moment in Haunting of Hill House, where she pulls a dress out, she's admiring it, then all of a sudden 2 arms rocket out of the sleeves and grab her. And it is a fantastic scene. And from that point, we now go into a flashback of a flashback of a flashback, I guess you could say, where we're now seeing from the point of Viola's death and where she is and what's going on. And essentially, she's in a purgatory that exists inside this chest. She's in a locked bedroom with a wardrobe full of all her favorite earthly possessions. And she's just waiting for that chest to open up one day. And she stands there and she has no concept of time. And she's standing there holding her dresses, just waiting for her daughter to open up that chest. And she knows it's coming one day. And when it finally happens and that door opens and she sees that it's her sister who took her life, just a fantastic moment. And then you see it from another point of view again, where I wrote it down because I'm like, it's probably one of my favorite moments in the episode. It is Viola standing there. It's a wide shot of Viola standing there inside the chest in one of her dresses with Perdita's open mouth corpse laying on the floor. It's just a beautiful moment.
And then we make the jump back to understand that the moaning faceless ghost in the attic is Perdita.
Yeah.
Also, because it was assumed at first that Viola had the plague, and then she had tuberculosis, which is easily passed along. Who would have thought an airborne disease that's easily spread from person to person? Imagine living through those kind of times. Her daughter is separated from her in the house, and she's not able. And Arthur, her husband, sleeps in the bed with her daughter and comforts her daughter all the time. And she keeps telling him, I want to go see our daughter. You can't. You'll get her sick. And so she's now, she yearns as a ghost now to see her daughter again. It's all that she lived for. And the narration here, and again, I hate to keep harping on this, but I feel like this is going to be something that people get annoyed with. Chris, you brought up our experience in the movies, seeing Vantage Point. I feel like there's going to be people who are like, oh my God, this narrator just repeats the same damn words over and over again. She wakes, she walks, she goes to sleep, she wakes. Yeah. And to me, it was just, it really, that was one of my favorite parts of the whole series, because you see Bly Manor existing now in the background as Viola lives as a ghost throughout, the next 150 years. And we start to learn how the other ghosts in the house got there, where she searches around the house looking for her daughter. She goes, Bly Manor was actually used during a plague outbreak to house sick people. And she grabs an actual plague doctor while he's in his mask and everything. And her grabbing him kills him. And now he is trapped on Bly Manor. His spirit is trapped on Bly Manor. The same thing, she encounters a little boy in her daughter's old room, and she's so happy to see a little kid, and she takes the little kid with her into the lake. And
was that the moment where she has this fantastic like Michael Myers head tilt?
Yeah.
Creepy, so creepy.
And,
because what's happening is she's been cast aside. Her only reason for living was seeing her daughter one day, and the memory of what's going on in that house. Her husband Arthur and her daughter, they leave Bly Manor to seek out a smaller, more normal life. And instead of taking the chest with them, they toss it into the lake, and she basically gives up at that point. And she sleeps for a longer amount of time. She wakes up, and now this chest, this bedroom, her purgatory, is now filled with water, and she's become the Lady of Bly. And over time, every night, she gets up and does the same routine. You find out that she is the muddy footprints you see in the house. Those are her footprints, and she goes into the house every night. And now the sleep, wake, walk dynamic has now one more thing's been added into it. Now it's sleep, forget, wake, walk. And that is now her routine every night while her features and her memory fade.
And that goes back to in episode 7, when Peter grabs who we now understand, having watched episode 8, is the ghost of Perdita, and goes, "This is what happens to us if we stay here, because people forget you. And the more that you forget as a ghost, just being there over and over again, and the more that you are forgotten about, you lose you forget what you look like. And the more you forget what you look like, you lose the physical features that make you, which is why all the ghosts we find out are faceless, including, of course, Viola's lady in the lake, Perdita's attic moaning ghost, the little boy ghost. All of these faceless ghosts have forgotten their own physical features because they've been there for so long. And it, like you said it, and I'll pass to you, but you said before that this is one of the best ghost stories for you, and I just happen to agree with you. So you can elaborate more on that, because I know.
No, listen, I'm someone, I stay quite often. My favorite, obviously we're both huge horror fans. My favorite subgenre of horror are ghosts, are supernatural stories, or other like spiritual realms. And at its core, this is the core story of this house, of this season. And it's just such a incredibly fleshed out ghost story. And the ideas and the sadness behind it is just it's never ending. It just really, more so the second time than the first time, I sat back and I'm like, God damn it, this is just on its own, and I think that's what makes it one of the greatest ghost stories. I mean, not this, there's so many, but it really is just, I cannot wait to revisit this over and over again. I'm so happy for Axel Caroline, who what I just because I think it's such a, what's the word I'm thinking of? It's such a fantastic calling card for her and her future as a director. Just to be able to point to this episode, like, this is by far and away the standout of the season.
This is the episode 6 of Hill House.
Yes.
Like, you don't have to to people who love Hill House, you don't have to explain what happened in episode 6. I'm not going to explain. I'm not going to take up time on this video explaining it. If you saw Hill House, me saying episode 6, you know the episode we're talking about. That is this episode. And you said, about this being such a great ghost story. This is The Haunting of Bly Manor. Like,
Yes.
that could have been the name of this episode. The name of, and that's why I said this could be a 55-minute movie called The Haunting of Bly Manor, because this is where we get the origin of the ghosts, the explanation. And some people might say, oh, there's too much exposition and too much storytelling, but it just worked. Every part of it, the black and white, Carlo Gugino's narration, the performances, Kate Siegel's eyes are so big, and they tell such a good story on their own. And she's so good in everything she does. Katie Parker, I'm so glad she got a chance to shine here, because there's been, she's very often, she's a kind of like a side character. After Absentia, she's kind of been like a side character, or only in bits and pieces. Here, she got to be like a main part of this episode, and she was fantastic. Yeah,
it's just rich. It's so rich, and it's so layered, and just the love and the emotion and the sadness and the torment. It's just, I mean, again, by far and away, the standout episode. That's what makes episode 9, it makes such a tough act to follow. Director E.L. Katz, who did episode 9, The Beast in the Jungle, it's, I feel for him, because it's, and I'd like to point out too, E.L. Katz is known primarily for directing Cheap Thrills with Pat Healy and Sarah Paxton. I've never seen Cheap Thrills, but you want to talk about another great ghost story, Pat Healy and Sarah Paxton in Ty West, The Innkeepers. Definitely, if you love ghost stories, definitely check that out. But he's directed episodes of Channel Zero, Swamp Thing, this TV series, Scream, the TV series, ABCs of Death 2. So more than fitting to direct the final episode of A Haunting of Bly Manor. And again, tough act to follow. Episode 8. Episode 9 is a solid episode, but episode 8 is just.
It's funny because a lot of people, and we've both seen this, a lot of people, including, I know Pete mentioned this, didn't like the ending of Hill House. A lot of people loved the show, thought it was great, thought it was scary as hell, and then kind of thought it ended on a weak note. I loved it. I think you did too. But I can see where, and again, I think when the quality of the episodes are usually at a certain level, there are certain expectations that people build up for themselves in a finale. And I even mentioned to you before we started, I loved parts of this finale. And then there are parts of this finale that I didn't necessarily love. I didn't hate anything about it, but there were parts of the finale that I didn't love, but I did feel that it brought, especially at the end, a great closure to everything that was in there. Before we really get into the finale, you mentioned Ty West's name. Ty West, on the off chance you're watching, please come back to horror. You were so good for such a short time.
Yes.
You made some of my favorite horror films of the last 2 decades, including House of the Devil, which is probably in my top 20. The Sacrament, which legitimately scared me and is one of the scariest cult movies that I've ever seen. Please make more horror movies. I know he like primarily works in TV now. And The Innkeepers, which is great also.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these, you have to imagine whatever. I mean, listen, you have to have paying gigs in between your passion projects, But yeah, everything you just named, Ty West is terrific. I eagerly await his next, whatever his next project might be in the horror realm, or even horror adjacent.
Yeah. So episode 9, the finale, we start with the episode 8 actually jumps back at the very end to the jump scare where the Lady of the Lake grabs Danny, and she's dragging Danny now through the house, out of the house, to the water. And we've seen this story before with Peter. We know that, this is going to be where she drowns Danny. And Flora stops her. And remember, this is the Lady of Bly Manor. This is Viola, and Viola lived everything for her daughter. And Flora is basically like, take me, I'll go with you. And she drops Danny, picks up Flora, and now you're having a heart attack thinking, oh my God, they can't kill Flora. No.
Yeah.
And she's walking Flora into the lake, and Danny yells out from the water's edge, you, me, us, which is what Rebecca Jessel and Peter Quint, the line that they were using with the kids to basically take over their bodies.
Which originates from episode 8. When Viola's daughter's born, she says, it's you, it's me, it's us.
Yes. And that action of Danny yelling that to the ghost of Viola enables Viola to turn around, walk back, and effectively inhabit the body of Danny. And Danny now is walking around with the ghost of Bly Manor inside of her, knowing that one day she is going to wake, walk, and and just go. And eventually one day, she doesn't know when, she knows that her clock is basically ticking now, and that one day the ghost that inhabits her body is just going to take over. But the fact that the ghost of Bly Manor, Viola, her ghost, has inhabited Danny's body, effectively frees all the other ghosts that had been trapped on Bly Manor. And you start to see them disappear. So Miss Jessel, Peter Quint, Hannah, the Plague Doctor, all of these ghosts that had been in their own sort of purgatory inside of the manor, they are now freed because of Danny's self-sacrifice. And that leads us to now the kind of emptying. Oh, and I didn't even mention Henry Wingrave, Henry Thomas, eventually finally decides he's gonna go back, and he's gonna see what's going on and see what he can do. Owen shows up, Jamie shows up, everybody shows up as this whole ghost business is happening. Henry Wingrave is nearly killed by the ghost of Viola. He manages to survive, and that eliminates his evil doppelganger ghost. So he's free of that guilt of his past. And you kind of feel like everyone else is going to get their happy ending. Danny, we're not so sure of. And then it leads us into the next act of the finale. But a great opening 10 to 15 minutes. And this opening 10 to 15 minutes kind of puts the haunting of Bly Manor itself. It ends that, because effectively the rest of the episode takes place away from Bly Manor.
Yeah. Danny is on essentially on Viola overload for a little while. I mean, you think about it, she's essentially, it's you, it's me, it's us. She's invited, a couple centuries worth of torment and love and sadness and in life and in death into her. And she's someone who already has experienced those things in her own life. So she deals with it for a little while, and then it sort of lies dormant, and her and Jamie, a couple of years past, are enjoying their life together. And just when she's at her most peaceful, she walks up to the front door of a flower shop that her and Jamie now own. And she sees, instead of seeing her own reflection, she sees the reflection of Viola. And in this amazing shot where they cut to her reaction, they cut back, the reflection is now gone. And she sees Jamie on the inside of the flower shop looking at her and smiling. And it crushes you and breaks your heart even more, like this, which is what repeatedly happens in this final episode. And you get some terrific moments between them, knowing what's coming. Dani doesn't want to waste any more time. She shows up to their home one night with a dying potted plant. And he says to her, "Hey, Jamie, you have to fix this." And Jamie pulls it out, and there's a ring at the bottom. And being the time this exists in, they couldn't get married. So this is basically like, this is for you and I. This is just to know that I'm not going anywhere. You're not going anywhere. This is for us. They visit Owen at his restaurant, which I believe is in Paris, right? I would have to assume. They're not too clear on that, but.
And isn't the name of the restaurant a pun?
A great place.
No, it's a better place.
Oh, yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah,
better place. It's
a better place.
Yes, and Hannah introduces the very first episode is called The Great Good Place. So this is a better place, but because of his most famous pun in the show, he calls the name of the restaurant a battered place, a batter place, and he has a picture of Hannah up on the wall.
Isn't it? There's a fantastic moment between the two. I just very quickly in the beginning, it broke my heart the first time, broke my heart even more the second time, where Owen says to Hannah, "What a life we could have had." Oh my God, bro. That's like, that type of stuff is what makes it, it's what makes this shows like this what they are.
Yeah.
And also very, very, very quickly, I don't know if you caught this, right before Hannah disappears, she says, "The rest is just," and she disappears. Was she going to say confetti?
Yes, I think so. I think that was the whole.
Exactly. Yeah. Just like Nell said in the final episode, the rest is just confetti, but she disappears. So I think that was supposed to be a nod to Hill House.
It's also at Owen's restaurant where they talk about, now we're years in the future now. We're over 5 years in the future. So Nell, not Nell, now I said Nell, Flora and Owen, they bring up the fact that Flora is now 17 and has a boyfriend, and that Henry, who's raising the two kids, is a nervous wreck. And Owen alludes to the fact that they don't really have any memories of Bly, and that being away from it maybe has canceled out the memories of this like haunted place, and that maybe taking the ghost of Viola inside of her and having those other ghosts disappear has freed the kids of the burden of having to grow up with all these memories. He said that like they came to the restaurant and they looked at the wall and they mentioned that they recognized Hannah, but they didn't really remember who she was. And that plays into what we eventually get to later on. But yeah, Dani and Jamie, they're able to live kind of like Viola was only given, was told you only have this much time, but it went on for 6 years.
Yeah, there's a lot of callbacks in that way. When Viola is really becoming more of a presence in Dani's body towards the end of the episode, there's a moment where Jamie comes home and the hallway's flooded, and it's just Dani staring down into a bathtub filled with water, and she's staring back at Viola, and she tells Jamie, "I can't feel anything anymore." And Jamie says, "I'll feel things for the both of us." That's what Rebecca Jessel says to Flora when Viola is taking Flora into the lake, like, don't worry, I'll feel it for the both of us. And you know, you could tell this has obviously been Danny's roughest go at this so far. And that night they're sleeping in bed and Danny wakes up, and while Jamie is still sleeping, she notices her hand is around Jamie's neck. And she knows that now she's becoming a danger to the both of them. So Jamie wakes up the next morning, Danny's gone, jumps on a plane, heads right to Bly Manor, and Danny's of course at the bottom of the lake in what is just heartbreaking but visually stunning, because Danny almost presented herself in a way. Danny's wearing earrings, she's wearing a dress, like she's, you know, planned for this, like she's, you know, she's prepared herself for this. You know, she walked into that, she walked into that lake ready to do this, ready to do it for herself and for everyone she loves.
And that brings us to if it was an anthology, the end of the wraparound story. Where for the first time since the very beginning of episode 1, we go back to this wedding that Carla Gugino is at. And she's finished her ghost story. And the bride, everybody else goes to bed, and the bride wants to stay and ask her a question. And she goes, you know, I feel that same way about, you know, now that I'm marrying somebody who I truly love, what happens if he dies? What happens if I die? And it brings up what's the line from the very, that Flora says way back when, dead doesn't mean gone. And, you know, it made me think about that. And that's like the central theme of this. But then we also find out in like a moment that makes you go, that the bride goes, it's weird that you chose that name because my middle name is Flora. And that's when you start to realize that everyone at that wedding is a character that we have seen before. That wedding, that the bride is Flora getting married. That Carla Gugino is Jamie telling the story of ending the story where, you know, the love of her life, Danny, is now at the bottom of Bly Manor, the lake in Bly. There's 2 men who in the very first episode, and we mentioned this earlier, Carla Gugino at the very beginning of the very first episode, she feels like a total stranger at this wedding. She shows up a little bit late. She sits down at the very end of the table, and she only makes eyes with one person, an Indian man, or a British man of Indian descent, and there's a connection, but to everyone else, including the bride and groom, she feels like a total stranger. And now you start to realize, oh, okay, she is basically the character of Jamie, and that Owen is there, and there's an old man there that we're led to believe is Henry now as an old man. Miles is there as like a 30-something-year-old. And we realize that she's telling this story to the people who it's about. That goes back to the dinner scene where Owen says the kids don't really remember much about Bly. And so it makes sense that they don't remember any of the story that she's telling. There's
a terrific moment between Flora, middle name Flora. I don't think they ever say what her actual first name is, but there's a terrific moment between her and Jamie where she tells Jamie, you know, at the beginning of this, you know, you were wrong. And she's like, what do you mean? She's like, it's not a ghost story, it's a love story. And Jamie says, same thing, really. And I'm like, oh, I love that, because it's very much true. It speaks volumes about the relationships in this, and the story at
Oh
its
yeah.
core, the story of Viola Willoughby, Viola Lloyd, you know?
And again, it goes back to the idea. Every character in here is in a love story. Hannah and
Yeah,
Owen are in a love story. Uh, Jamie and Danny are in a love story. Rebecca and Peter are in a love story. Henry was in a love story with Charlotte Wingrave. Uh, Obviously, Viola was in a love story, a familial love with her sister. Then it became a love with her daughter that spawned the ghost, and the initial haunting. It and that is, again, that is a criticism of the show to a lot of people. Oh, it wasn't a ghost story. It wasn't scary enough. It was too much of a love story. And so much of Mike Flanagan's work is that is
yeah,
it's this duality of characters who have rich emotional backstories with these both human horrors and in some cases supernatural horrors, uh, and they always intertwine. Of course, this is a ghost story. Of
yeah.
course it is. But it is, of course, also a love story. So yeah, you can totally look at this. And yeah, I can see where people might not love this from beginning to end if you went into it expecting just pure adrenaline rush scares. But
Yeah, this isn't. I always find it weird when people just like, oh, I don't like when horror ends with a happy ending or whatnot. It's like, even the same argument can be made for Hill House that could be made for this. Like, how would you consider the ending entirely happy? Like,
yeah,
because they like so, there's so much tragedy, and
yeah,
it's people taking the best from so much tragedy. So how on earth is this an entirely happy ending? Like, how could you say
yeah.
that?
I mean,
It's not like 13 Ghosts
no,
where everyone's just hugging at the end. It's not
I
like that at all.
do, I do love the final shot.
Oh, it's
So
fantastic.
Carla Gugino's character, who is not named, but we can call her Jamie because she is basically the character of Jamie, now older. She
And
mentioned,
after another beautiful monologue, she has these
oh
beautiful, like, now
yes,
just another beautiful monologue to close us out on.
yeah, and she mentions in these monologues how once Danny left, she always she knows that the ghost is going to get up and walk. So she leaves the door open and she leaves a light on, like almost inviting her in. And
Yeah.
so the wedding is over. She gives the bride a hug and she goes into her hotel room. She cracks the door open and she pulls a recliner out in front of the door and she's sitting up waiting, and she falls asleep. And the last thing you see as the episode ends and the series comes to an end is just the hand on her shoulder as she's sleeping that
Yeah.
shows that Danny is there with her. And again, it's a heartbreaking, but it's a heart affirming moment too. It's just great.
It's
Um,
it's a it's a great way to close it out. Absolutely.
so let me ask you, uh, because we've talked a little bit about obviously the way people have compared this to Hill House. Which How would you compare it to Hill House? What better were what do you think?
I I don't want to go for the rookie score, so to speak, and say like I could say they're equally as great in their own way, because I really do feel that way. There are things about Hill House, elements that I like more. And when I look at it as a whole, I enjoyed Hill House more. But when I tell you that it is not far off. It is right there. I have seen reviews where people are like, "Oh, Hill House by far and away is better." I can't say that it's better. I enjoyed Hill House slightly more, but I believe if I watch them back to back and with a few more rewatches of this, they could be neck and neck. I enjoyed it even more. I enjoyed Bly Manor even more on a second rewatch. I have to say that immediately, my first watch, I enjoyed the ending of Bly Manor more than Hill House. And I don't have those complaints that a lot of people have about Hill House. I understand, and I'm glad why they ended it the way they ended it. I felt slightly more satisfied with the ending of Bly Manor. So
Yeah,
in terms of
I agree
stacking
with
up the
that.
two, I would love to say, like, listen, you can't compare them. It's two different stories, but this is really, you have to compare it in the way that we compare seasons of American Horror Story.
Yeah.
Yes, they're different stories, but they're half of the same cast. It's a nebula using the same font. It's the Haunting of, that's what it is.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's Mike Flanagan's The Haunting of. You have to compare them.
You have to.
As much as I would like to say, oh, they're their own thing, which they are, he's almost asking you to compare them
Yeah.
when you decide to follow. I know people who were upset because they thought Bly Manor was a sequel and they expected to
Yeah.
see the same characters because, well, The Haunting of Hill House, maybe that family goes to a new building. And I understand that. I looked at it like this, and I explained my in my Stardust reaction as a finale. I said, I remember the moments of Hill House more, and I think that the moments of Hill House hit harder. I I literally yelled out loud from some scary moments in Hill House. I also cried harder in Hill House,
Yeah.
like like hysteric tears during some episodes. I think episode 6 of Hill House was the best overall episode of either series. Character wise, Bly Manor, I think, is better. I think Bly Manor has the more memorable characters.
Yeah.
I think Bly Manor tells the better stories for the characters. Even the characters that I didn't particularly feel too invested in, I thought it was a better, I don't want to say written show, but I felt the emotional weight of these characters. And I wanted to hang out with these characters. Like,
Yeah.
as much as I will forever remember the bent neck girl and those Nell moments, I will remember Owen's puns, and I will remember the cold antagonism between Hannah and Peter, and the sarcastic charm of Jamie flirting with Danny, and her her calling her Poppins. The character moments in this, for me, were bigger and better. The scare and emotional, heavy emotional moments were bigger in Hell House. So they kind
Yeah.
of level out like this, where certain things I thought hit harder for Hill House, but certain things hit harder for Bly Manor. I guess it depends. Like, I will watch episode 8 of this many, many more times than I will rewatch the whole series. And
Yeah.
I've gone back and watched episode 6 of Hill House 2 or 3 times without revisiting the whole series. I watched it twice, but I've never gone back and watched the other episodes. Episode 6, I've rewatched at least 2 or 3 more times.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where I stand, where scares and crying moments, Hill House. Characters, Bly Manor.
Yeah, I think they're equally as great in as they balance each other out. Exactly what you said. I think I said in our first episode, Hill House, the the scares are at a certain level and the emotions at a certain level. And with Bly Manor, the scares are slightly toned down, but the emotions and the character development is slightly turned up. You're establishing a lot of relationships in Bly Manor, and that's something that's easy for people to get invested in, especially when you have characters as charming as we have here.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I do love these characters more. I think the characters in Hill House are great, but being that we're establishing love and bonds and relationships, that's something that easily, like as these people fall in love, we fall in love with them.
Yeah.
So I think it's very
100%.
easy to love these characters in Bly Manor more than the characters in Hill House.
Yeah. For those of you out there who want a star rating of any kind, I gave this 4.5 out of 5. Because I did have criticisms. Certain episodes for me dragged a little bit. There were some characters that I wasn't fully invested in, but 9 episodes, yeah, 4.5, definitely great stuff.
I would give it the same score. The only thing in the show I really, not that I say wasn't invested in, was just kind of like, yeah, been there, done that, and not necessarily a bad thing. I was more indifferent to it. That was really the story of Rebecca and Peter, the Bonnie and Clyde element, the the let's steal money and run away. It's the psycho element of it, but again, it was just something that fell a little flat for me in what was that, episode 6, episode 5,
7, 6 and 7. It was that.
Oh yeah, 7. You're right. It's 7. Again, it's just that's where my half a point deduction comes from. But other than that, I absolutely loved it.
Another thing for Netflix, 9 episodes is where it is at.
Perfect.
The problem with all of your MCU shows is you're trying to stretch out this stuff into 13 episodes, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, Bly Manor, guys, we have so much fun coming up for you guys on the Lassercast, and we have a ton more for you coming up. So, this is the Lassercast. Chris, Danny, Pete will be back in our next review, and we will see you later.